fractions and decimals. In this lecture, we're going to talk about adding and subtracting fractions, introduction to decimals, a little bit of rounding, decimals, adding, and subtracting. Your homework for this lesson is 4A, fractions, adding, and subtracting. 4B, homework, intro to decimals, rounding, adding, and subtracting. So let's get to it. When we're going to add and subtract with like fractions, that means the denominators are exactly the same, all we have to do is add the numerator or the top. So let's look at the first one, 3/11 plus 5/11. Since we have a common denominator, all we have to do is add the numerators, and our answer is 8/11. Let's look at the next one, 17/30 minus 13/30. Once again, we have a common denominator. So all we're going to do is subtract the numerator, or the top, and we end up with 4/30. Now, yeah, we do have to reduce. So let's do a little prime factorization. I know that 4 is 2 times 2, and 30 is 2 times 3 times 5. We're just going to cancel all of our common numbers, which gives us 2/15, and that's our answer. Let's look at the last one. We have 4/30 minus 9/30. Once again, we have a common denominator. So all we're going to do is subtract the numerator, or the top. Now don't freak out if you get a negative. That's totally cool because we can have negative fractions. But for this one, we still have to reduce. So -5 is -1 times 5, and 30 is 2 times 3 times 5. We're going to slash or cancel everything that's the same, and we end up with -1/6, which is the same as -1/6. Now we're going to go into fractions that don't have a common denominator. I like to use an alternative method called the butterfly method, and I think it makes life a little easier. But I'm also going to show you how to use the least common denominator. And if you really like that, that's what you want to do. Remember, I don't really care how you get the answer, as long as you get the correct answer. First, let me show you finding the least common denominator. We're going to take 2/9 plus 1/6. The first thing that we have to do is find the least common denominator. And how do we do that? Well, first, we need to do our prime factorization. 9 is 3 times 3, and 6 is 3 times 2. Next, we're going to circle everything. So everything gets circled. Notice that even though I only have 1 3, I still have to circle it. Then we're going to write numbers as a multiplication. I have 3 times 3 times 2. Well, 3 times 3 times 2 is 18, and that gives us our least common denominator. What we do next is we rewrite our fraction addition, but you're going to notice that I left a little space here at the other side of each fraction. We need to get the denominator to 18. So I think, well, 9 times what gives me 18? Well, that's 2. But if I multiply by 2 in the denominator, of course, I have to multiply by 2 in the numerator. For 1/6, I look at my denominator again. 6 times what is 18? Well, in this case, that's 3. But whatever I do to the denominator, I have to do to the numerator. Now let's simplify. 2 times 2 is 4. 9 times 2 is 18. Plus 1 times 3 is 3, and 6 times 3 is 18. Now we have our common denominator. All we have to do is add the numerators, and we end up with 7/18. 7/18 doesn't reduce, so hey, we got it. Let me show you the butterfly method. Okay, here's our butterfly. We're going to take 3/5 minus 1/4. First, we're going to create our wings by cross multiplication. 3 times 4 is 12. 5 times 1 is 5. Now what we need to do is make the tail, which is just 5 times 4, which is 20. Well, how does that work? Well, we're going to create fractions by writing each wing getting a tail. That's weird, but let me show you. You're like this. I have 12 over 20, so I have one wing and a tail, minus, because this is subtraction, one wing over a tail. There we go. So let me just take the butterfly out so you can really see what we did. And what exactly do we have? Well, we have 12 over 20 minus 5 over 20. 12 minus 5 is 8, and we always have to reduce. Now 8 is 2 times 2 times 2, and 20 is 2 times 2 times 5. We're going to slash or cancel everything that's the same. And what are we left with? 2/5, and that's our answer. Let's try another one. Let's try this one. 3/4 minus 2/9. Once again, we're going to multiply our wings, so 3 times 9 is 27. 4 times 2 is 8. We're going to multiply our tail. We're going to multiply straight across in the denominator. 4 times 9 is 36. Now, we're just going to make our fractions. So, we're going to have 27 over 36 minus 8 over 36. Yeah, I know. How much easier can it get? So this is what it really looks like. And we're going to do a couple like this without the butterfly in it. But I'm just going to rewrite this. 27 over 36 minus 8 over 36. We have a common denominator, so 27 minus 8 is 19, and we keep the denominator. Since 19 doesn't reduce, we just have 19 over 36, and that's it. Let's look at a couple more. Let's look at 2/9 plus 1/6. Now this should look familiar because we did the least common denominator on this one. Let's try the butterfly method. 2 times 6 is 12. 1 times 9 is 9. 9 times 6 is 54. Now let's rewrite our fractions. We'll end up with 12 over 54 plus 9 over 54. And there's our common denominator. 12 plus 9 is 21 over 54, and we need to see if we can reduce it. We can see that 3 times 7 is 21, and 3 times 3 times 3 times 2 is 54. We're going to slash the 3 over 3, and that ends up being 7 over 18. That looks familiar. Let's look at another one. 4/5 minus 3/4. Now, if you'd like to try this one on your own, just pause the video. Otherwise, let's keep going. Our first wing is 4 times 4, which is 16. Our second wing is 3 times 5, which is 15. And finally, the tail is 5 times 4, which is 20. Let's make our fractions. The first one will be 16 over 20 minus 15 over 20. We have a common denominator. How simple was that? 16 minus 15 is 1, and our answer turns out to be 1 over 20. Let's look at the last one. We have 1/9 minus 2/7. Let's first find the wings. So 1 times 7 is 7. 2 times 9 is 18. And finally, 9 times 7 is 63. Let's make our fractions. We'll have 7 over 63 minus 18 over 63. We have our common denominator, so all we have to do is subtract the numerator. Well, 7 minus 18 turns out to be negative 11 over 63. We could say that, which is cool, but usually we like to put the negative sign in front of it. So the answer for 1 over 9 minus 2/7 is negative 11 over 63. And you did it. Here's the self-quiz. Now what you want to do is you want to pause the video, do these, and then press play to check. Let's look at these three together. The first one is 1/8 plus 2/5. Did you get C, 21 over 40? Awesome. For number 2, we have 6/7 minus 4/9. Did you get B? Cool. For the last one, we have 8/11 minus 7/5. And hopefully you get A. If you didn't, let me show you how these work. I'm going to use the butterfly method. 1 times 5 is 5. 8 times 2 is 16. And our denominator, which is the tail, is 8 times 5, which is 40. This gives us 21/40. Let's look at the next one. 9 times 6 is 54. 7 times 4 is 28. And 7 times 9 is 63. 54 minus 28 is 26. And you did it. Let's look at the last one. 5 times 8 is 40. 11 times 7 is 77. And for the tail, 11 times 5 is 55. 40 minus 77 is negative 37. Remember, we like the negative in the front, so that's how we get A, negative 37/55. Cool. Introduction to decimals. A decimal number, or decimal, refers to any number written in decimal notation. Let's look at our place value chart. You're going to notice that we have a decimal point. To the left are our integers, and to the right are our decimals. Now for the decimals, we start with 10, but we actually call it a tenths. Hundredths, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, millions, and so on. How do I know the difference between an integer and a decimal? It's the THS, or just TH. What number is in the following place? We have 234 and 89 hundredths, or 234.89. What I like to do is actually put that number into my place value, especially if I'm not great at place values yet. So what number is in the ones? That would be the 4. What number is in the tens? That would be the 3. What number is in the hundreds? That would be the 2. What number is in the tenth or tenths? That would be 8. And finally, what number is in the hundredths or hundredth? And that would be 9. Here's one for you to try. You're going to pause the video, get the answers, and then press play to check. Let's see how you did. So once again, I like to put my number in the place value chart. What number is in the ones? That would be the 9. What number is in the hundreds? That would be the 1. What number is in the thousands? That would be the 7. What number is in tens? That would be the 8. And finally, what number is in the hundredths or hundredth? And that would be 0. Rounding decimals. So how do we do it? What are the rules? Well, the first thing you want to do is underline the place to be rounded. For instance, if the question asks to round to the nearest tenths, you underline the number in the tenths place. Look at the number to the right of the one you underlined, or look next door. If that number is 5 or larger, add 1 to the underlying number. If it's 4 or smaller, just leave that number alone. Finally, change all the numbers to the right of the rounded number blank, or just take them out. So let's try one. Let's round the number 13.98467 to the nearest thousandth. I just like to rewrite the number to make it a little bigger, but first thing we have to do is underline the place to be rounded, which is the thousandth. Then what we do is we look to the number next door. Then we have to decide. The number next door is 6. Is 6 5 or larger, or 4 or smaller? Well, in this case, 6 is 5 or larger. That means we have to add 1 to the underlying number. Then everything else to the right goes away. And what's our answer? 13.985. Let's look at this one. 101.2418 to the nearest hundredth. I like to write it really big. First thing we do is we underline the place to be rounded, which is the hundredths. Then we look to the number next door. And we have to decide, is the number next door, which is a 1, 5 or larger, or is it 4 or smaller? Well, in this case, 4 is 4 or smaller, so we do not do anything to the underlined number. We just leave it alone, and everything behind it goes blank, goes away, goes somewhere else. So our answer turns out to be 101.24. Let's look at this one, 7.1238 to the nearest tenths. First thing we're going to do is we're going to underline the place to be rounded, which is the tenths. Then we look next door, which is the 2, and we have to decide, is 2 5 or larger, or is 2 4 or smaller? In this case, 2 is 4 or smaller. That means we leave it alone, and we get rid of everything behind the underlined number. So our answer is 7.1. Types of decimals. Now we have 3 types of decimals. We have ones that are called terminating, and a terminating decimal terminates or ends. Yeah, it sounds really strange. But for instance, 0.286 or 0.7957156, they just end. They don't go on and on. But then we have what's called a repeating decimal, and that's when one or more of the number repeats. For instance, 0.11111111 or 0.256256256, and so on, or 0.893939393. We also have non-terminating and non-repeating decimals, and in this case, the best example is pi. Pi is 3.14159265, and it goes on and on and on. It doesn't repeat and it doesn't terminate. For decimals that repeat a number or numbers, we draw a line above the repeating number or numbers. A line above a number in a decimal tells us it repeats. So 0.1 with a line above it is 0.11111111. 0.256, well, the line is above the 256, so that's 0.256256256, and so on. 0.893, now notice, the line is only over the 93, so that's the only piece that repeats. That's how I get 0.893939393. Now here's a little cool tidbit for you. The line is called a vinculum. Yeah, I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. Vinculum. Anyway, you don't need to know that. It's just kind of a cool little thing. If you're at a party, say, hey, I know what the line above a decimal that repeats is. Okay. Adding and subtracting decimal numbers. This is so cool. You'll love it. All we have to do is line up the decimals. So we need to put them on top of each other. Okay? Then we have to bring the decimal straight down. There we go. And then we add as usual. 3 plus 4 is 7. 2 plus 9 is 11. Of course, we have to carry the 1. 1 plus 7 plus 6, we carry the 1, is 14. 1 plus 1 plus 5 is 7. And you did it. Let's look at subtraction. It's the exact same thing. We need to line up our decimals. We're going to bring down the decimal straight down. And then we're going to subtract as usual. 5 minus 5 is 0. 2 minus 1 is 1. 5 minus 1 is 4. And 4 minus 3 is 1. Cool. What about this one? Well, we actually do exactly the same thing. We're going to line up our decimals. All right, we're going to bring our decimals straight down. And then we're going to start adding. 5 plus 5 plus 5 is 15, so we have to carry the 1. 1 plus 2 plus 7 plus 1, we have to carry the 1 again, is 11. 1 and 1 and 1 is 3. So the answer for this one is actually $3.15. That's pretty neat. I want you to do these 4 by yourself. Pause the video, do them, and then press play, and we'll work them together. All right, let's see how you did. First thing we have to do is we need to line up our decimals. We're going to bring the decimal straight down. And since we're adding, we're just going to add. 6 plus nothing is 6. 1 plus 1 is 2. 1 plus 1 is 2. 6 plus 6 is 12, so we're going to carry the 1. And then 1 plus 2 plus 5 is 8. And you did it. Let's look at number 2. We're going to have 85.27 minus 43.16. Now I lined up my decimals. Next, I need to bring the decimals straight down. And then we're going to subtract. 7 minus 6 is 1. 2 minus 1 is 1. 5 minus 3 is 2. And 8 minus 4 is 4. Let's look at number 3. Once again, I lined up my decimals. Then I brought my decimal straight down, and we're going to subtract. Well, I can't take 5 minus 8, so I need to borrow. So I'm going to borrow from the 7 and make it a 6, and then we're going to have 15. So 15 minus 8 is 7. 6 minus 5 is 1. But again, I can't take 1 minus 2, so I have to borrow from the 8, which makes it a 7. And we'll have 11 minus 2, which is 9. 7 minus 2 is 5. Cool. Let's look at the last one. Now for the last one, we have 28 plus 12.05. I didn't mention, but anytime we have just a number, the decimal is at the end. So we're going to have 28 plus 12.05. I'm going to bring the decimal straight down, and then we add. Nothing plus 5 is 5. Nothing plus 0 is 0. 8 plus 2 is 10, so I'm going to carry my 1. 1 plus 2 plus 1 is 4. And you did it. You're going to do these two by yourself. You're going to pause the video, do them, and then press play to check. The first one is 10 plus 34.16. What we're going to do is we're going to line up the decimals. Then we're going to bring the decimal straight down. Now some students like to put zeros on the other end. We don't have to. I just showed you one that we didn't. But if you want to put zeros there, that's totally cool. So let's add. 0 plus 6 is 6. 0 plus 1 is 1. 0 plus 4 is 4. And 1 plus 3 is 4. For the next one, we're going to bring down the decimal, just like before, but we have to have the zeros there. The reason is we need to start borrowing. Now this is going to get a little crazy. I need to borrow from the 4 to make it a 3. That will make the 10. But I have to borrow from the 10 to make it a 9 to make the other one a 10. Then I have to borrow from that 10, make it a 9 to give it 10 to the last one. 10 minus 8 is 2. 9 minus 7 is 2. 9 minus 6 is 3. 3 minus 2 is 1. And 2 minus nothing is 2. What about positive and negative numbers? We're going to follow the same rules. We're going to add 7.12 plus negative 9.92. Since they're different signs, we're going to subtract and keep the larger number sign. Now I can't exactly take 7.12 minus 9.92. So what we do is we take the larger number, forgetting the negative sign, and we subtract from the other number. 2 minus 2, bring down our decimal, of course. 2 minus 2 is 0. 9 minus 1 is 8. 9 minus 7 is 2. Now, when we look at the original, we have 7.12 plus negative 9.92. We We have different signs, we subtract and keep the larger number sign. Well, the larger number is 9.92. So our answer is going to be negative 2.8 or negative 2.80. Let's look at the second one. We have negative 5.4 minus 9.6. For this one, hopefully you remember, we change it to an addition. Negative 5.4 plus negative 9.6. They're the same sign, so we just add them and keep that sign. I'm going to line up my decimals. I'm going to bring my decimal straight down, and then we're going to add. 4 plus 6 is 10, so I'm going to carry my 1. 1 plus 5 plus 9 is actually 15. Now, we have the same sign, we have to add and keep that sign. So our answer is negative 15 or negative 15.0. Here is the self-quiz. You're going to pause the video, find the answers, then press play to check. Let's see how you did. 0.859 plus 1.728 is B, 2.587. For number 2, 5.4 plus 0.078 is 5.478. And now for number 3. I asked you to round the answer to the nearest tenths place. 9 minus 5.7058, rounding to the nearest tenths, is 3.3. Decimal to fraction. Now for this part, we're not going to worry about reducing fractions, but you will have to do it in your homework. I just think it's easier if we just look at it without reducing. It just adds more stuff to the lecture. So let's look at one. I like to say it to fraction it. 0.7 is 7 tenths. How would I write that as a fraction? Well, 7 tenths. 0.597, we would say 597 thousandths. That would be 597 over 1,000. Finally, 0.15. Well, that's 15 hundredths. That's the same as 15 over 100. Now don't freak out because you can't remember tenths, hundredths, whatever. There's actually a pattern to it. Do you see it? Well, 0.7, we have one decimal place, and how many zeros do we have? 1. 0.597, we have 3 decimal places, and how many zeros do we have? 3. That's pretty cool. 0.15, how many decimal places do we have? We have 2, and then we have 2 zeros. Now remember, we're not reducing yet. You'll need to do that in your homework. Yes, the denominator will always begin with a 1. Notice we have 10, 1,000, and 100. Say it and fraction it. For these, 16.3 is 16 and 3 tenths. The and is reserved for the decimal. Well, that is 16, the big number, and 3 tenths. This one, 102.15, is 102 and 15 hundredths. 102 is the big number. Then we have 15 over 100. Do you notice anything about these ones? Well, 87.601, how many decimal places do we have? We have 3. So we're going to have 601 over 1,000. 3 zeros. The number in front of the decimal is the big number. I forgot to mention that. Then we have 56 over, well, we have 2 decimal places, so we'll have 2 zeros. Once again, we're not reducing anything yet. And that's about as hard as it gets. All right, here's the last self-quiz of the day. Pause the video, answer the questions, then press play to check. Let's see how you did. What number is in the following place? The hundreds, that would be 0. Tenths, 1. Tens, 9. Thousandths, 5. Hundredths, 8. We have that big number there, 1729.0567, rounded to the nearest thousandth. In this case, it'll be 1729.057. For that one, you need to underline the 6 and look next door. Since 7 is 5 or larger, we round it up 1. So that's how we get to 7. Round to the nearest hundred. 1700. Notice, round to the nearest hundreds, not hundredths, hundreds. The hundreds place is where the 7 is. Round to the nearest tenths. Did you get 17.291? That's right. When we look at the number, we underline the 0, look to the number next door. That number happens to be 5 or larger, so we have to add 1 to the underlined number. And that's how we get 1729.1. Write 15.7 as a fraction, or 15 and 7/10. 15 is the big number, and then 7 over 10. Write 201 and 791 thousandths as a fraction. 201 is the big number, and 791 over 1,000 is our fraction. Thank you, and I hope to see you soon.